Yes.
Venerable, I'm so sorry. Is there a way that you can answer a question before we start?
Yes, yes.
You just because it's related to what you talked yesterday. You talked about generosity,
Yes.
but it was what I got was it was primarily about sharing your wealth.
This is, yes. So I did mention that the 3 vehicles or the 5 vehicles, they practice generosity in different ways. So because the subject of chapter 3 is the 5 vehicles and the focus is on the human and heavenly practice, therefore the main way of practicing generosity is to give material things. So are you thinking about the giving of Dharma and all that, which you may have?
Thinking about food.
That's material.
The text emphasize a lot on the generosity of food,
Yes,
but
yes.
I wanted to know why. Food, I understand
Yeah.
poverty and sharing wealth, but why specifically food?
Well, there's 2 ways you can look at this question. One way is if you try and imagine yourself in the Buddha's time, back in the ancient days, food production is not as easy as, we take it for granted now. You just go to ShopRite, Costco, and you can eat to the point where there's wastage. But back in the ancient days of India and in any of the ancient civilization, food was basically, part luxury. So therefore, offering of food is actually quite a generous act. So that's one way of looking at it um, within the context of time. But even if we come to our modern day, food is a big part of our life. Um, the first thing you wake up in the morning, I'm pretty sure, apart from, grumbling about, oh, maybe another 5 minutes, snooze button, would be, what am I going to have for breakfast? So food is a very big part of our lives and it's deeply connected with our physical health. And for us to practice our physical well-being is a key factor. If you're if you're sick because you're malnourished, lack of food, then it's very hard to practice. Unless, mentally you're very strong, like some of the ascetic practitioners. But in that context, for the ascetic practitioners, it's intentional that they starve themselves or whatnot. But for the average person, you need you need to maintain a healthy body, which means you have to have sufficient food intake before you can happily attend a Dharma retreat, and listen to Dharma talks and not fall asleep in meditation and so forth. So food in terms of the way it connects with our body and therefore and how we use our body in our practice is important. Yeah. Yes.
Wasting food too. I mean, that might be a problem with practice unless you are actually not wasting food. I think Faye mentioned it earlier, but in a broader context, there are countries that waste tons of food. So
Yes. And that's because of the advancement in civilization and production. Um, so, but with that advancement, instead of being able to redirect the excess food to poverty-stricken areas, it works out cheaper economically to just dump it into the ocean.
oh yeah.
And so the businessmen prefer to dump excess food in the ocean.
And what effect is that going to have with marine life?
Yeah. So
Anything.
yeah. So and the other aspect in terms of offering food is it's probably the easiest thing to think about in terms of when you're practicing generosity. Yeah. Okay. So back to yesterday's topic. No, you're welcome. So I am going to assume you all have great memory. I'm not going to do recaps like I used to do in previous years, only because I'm hoping to finish all the slides material, if preferable. Okay, so I'll rely on your brain power to remember where we're up to. So we're talking about the 3 meritorious practices of generosity, upholding the precepts, and meditative concentration. So yesterday we've completed a brief discussion and mention about the practice of generosity. And now we're moving on to the practice of upholding the precepts. So this was the slide that we finished off with yesterday, and just reminding us that when we uphold the precept, we need to also cultivate steadfast determination or a conviction in ourselves that this is the right thing to do. I've made a commitment to uphold the precepts and I have to stick with it. And in order to support that determination, we also need to develop our tolerance, our ability to tolerate difficulties and external stresses, which may entice us to break the precepts. So when we're looking at the practice of upholding the precepts, we need to also look at other qualities and virtues that can help us consolidate this practice. So concerning the practice of upholding the precept, it is important to understand which precepts a Buddhist practitioner should uphold. Now, the Buddha Dharma teaches us that for the 5-vehicle practitioners, there are 3 sets of precepts, and these are the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, and the 10 wholesome precepts. Now, these are the virtuous precepts practiced by all 5 vehicles. So even though we're focusing on the human and heavenly vehicle, the practitioners of the other 3 vehicles, the Sravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas, all these other practitioners also uphold the 5 precepts. So in other words, these precepts are what all practitioners of the Dharma should learn and uphold. And regarding this, the next verse tells us, treat others as you would treat yourself. No killing, no harming with weapons, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no deceptive speech. Consuming alcohol destroys all virtues. Buddhist practitioners should uphold this 5th precept. Okay, within this verse, what it covers is the 5 precepts. And why should we uphold the precepts? Some people don't really understand the purpose or the meaning of upholding the precept. But because they hear that, oh, if you uphold the precepts, you will gain these really good merits and virtues. So they're interested in upholding the precepts, but they don't really know the deeper meaning and purpose of it. Now, such a situation, in terms of, I want to uphold the precept because I want virtues and merits, is not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so if you know of someone and you tell them, oh, it's really important to uphold the precept, and they ask you, well, what's in it for me? Then maybe you need to then, tackle it in another way. Well, there's a lot of merit to be gained. So this is a bit of, skillful means. If you know the person's character and that's the only way to get them to uphold the precepts. It's not fully ideal, but it's better than nothing. And from the beginning, when the Buddha taught the Agama Sutras, the Dhammapada, and so on, in some of those earlier scriptures, and all the way to the Mahayana Sutras, all these teachings explain the meritorious practice of upholding the precepts. And it summarizes the aim as to treat others as you would treat yourself. and consequently, one willingly restrains their own desires. So by using one's own perspective to make inferences about what other people like and dislike, then that can help you determine how you should behave in their presence, how you should interact with them in order to minimize any harm, particularly unintentional harm. So this is effectively the practice of stepping into others' position, which is the same as the Confucian golden rule of reciprocity. This is ideal, but I'll tell you a really funny story. So the idea is, treat others as you would treat yourself. So of course, the things that I don't like, I won't offer it to others. But it turns out with one of my friends, there was this particular thing that I thought tasted really bad. So I'm determined I'm never giving that as a gift anymore. But then my friend turns around and asks me, did you get me some? So, ideally treat others as you would treat yourself, but sometimes you may need to kind of ask them and get a bit more information as well. Okay. So in terms of upholding the precept, please remember, the golden rule, or if you're a bit unsure of, if someone asks you, well, why should I uphold the precept? Then you can explain to them along this line of argument. Well, it's basically elaborating in detail, in a practical sense, how to realize this saying of treat others as you would treat yourself. Okay, so this is an excerpt from the Samyutta Nikaya, and it says, I want to live and not to die. I want happiness and not suffering. Having such desires, if another being were to take my life, would I be pleased? If I am not pleased with this, then if I were to take the life of another, who likewise wants to live and not to die, and who wants happiness and not suffering, then they would not like it either. Furthermore, the things that I do not like would similarly be disliked by others. Therefore, how can I use what I dislike to harm others? So this is a more detailed expression of that golden rule of to treat others as you would treat yourself. Now, this concept, as mentioned, is the same as the Confucian golden rule, which is do not give to others what you dislike. And also the Christian teaching of do unto others as you would have them do to you. So in this sense, we should be able to understand that it's quite universal. Upholding the precept, this practice of upholding the precept is quite universal across many of the mainstream religions. It's a matter of the individual rules. And so when we're looking further into this, we'll be looking particularly at the Buddhist rules of applying to Buddhist practitioners. So given that we dislike suffering and we want happiness, then we can safely assume that other people are in the same position. So we shouldn't, and we really don't have the right to deprive them of happiness because of our own selfishness and because of our actions. So, but sometimes, our emotions can get the better of us. And this is where the power of the precepts come in. So in the Chinese tradition, when we talk about taking refuge in the Triple Gem and upholding the precept, they have mention of the precept body. And it's an intangible thing. But we can think of it as once you make the commitment to uphold these precepts, it gives you a invisible force, sort of like the little angel and devil that tells you, no, 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 you can't do this, you don't do this. So it gives you an extra tool to help you restrain yourself when you're in a position that you're tempted to do something that might harm others. And that itself, even though on the face of it, it looks like it's protecting other people, it's also protecting yourself. Because karmically, you also benefit by not harming others. When you make a conscious decision to uphold the precepts and a conscious decision to, I don't want to harm beings, therefore I will not do this. This is a wholesome karmic act. So there are wholesome karmic forces and karmic seeds that you are planting for yourselves. So if we look at all of this, it boils down to, great compassion. Mahayana focuses on great compassion. And sometimes this is split into compassion and loving kindness. So compassion is the aspect where you're unwilling to see people in suffering, and so you want to help them out of that. Loving kindness is where you want to bestow happiness onto others. So it goes both ways. You look a bit confused.
No, my mind's going because my thought is, then could the people that live in Israel and Palestine or in the city or in really so many sections, if you live in a strong political environment, and you have the arising, and the arising really of any precept, so to speak, and you want to protect yourself. I mean, it's almost it's like it doesn't apply in all those conditions, on a steady basis.
Well, there's the practical aspect of it. So, if as you mentioned in the given the Middle East situation, if the people there were dedicated to implementing these rules as part of their own practice, the situation wouldn't be where it is now.
Well, sure. I mean,
yeah, but that's why. Take a step back. What we're talking about here is our own personal practice on the path. If we can't change the world, but in another sense we can. So if we can slowly, through our own practice of the precepts, change ourselves and allow others to see the benefits of these changes, and thereby giving them, influencing them to also then take interest in the Dharma and practice, then slowly this movement can spread further. And it's in this way, in a very organic way, that we can slowly change our surroundings, and ideally that would spread even further. But you need to understand the world we live in. Buddhism basically doesn't really exist in the Middle East. So it's very hard for us, given our training and the environment we're used to fully comprehend and be able to understand the reasons for what's happening in the Middle East at the ground level, because I have friends from that area that I've known since high school, and the hatred they have for someone who lives across the border, whom they don't know, is just ingrained. Yeah. So that is something that's very hard for us to then impose Buddhism onto them, because that's what they've chosen to uphold effectively. But we can do what we are capable of as Buddhist practitioners and make sure that it doesn't spread further in that sense. Okay. Yes.
One thing, I would say I would treat them the way they need to be or want to be treated rather than what I want, because I might not understand what they want.
Well, that goes to my funny story, in that this rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to step into others' position is, it has to be carried out with wisdom. So in that respect, the first thing is to act out of compassion. Motivation is out of compassion, but then to have that compassion be guided by wisdom so that eventually the way you treat them is the way that they would like to be treated, not the way you think they should be treated.
You're talking about change. There's a lot of people who say that change has to come from inside first.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to our topic of upholding the precepts as a Buddhist practitioner. The first and the most important is the 5 precepts, and hopefully you've all been exposed to the 5 precepts. Now for the male and female householders, they're respectively referred to as upasaka or upasika. And this word has the meaning of serving or being intent on or engaged with. So when we decide to become a Buddhist practitioner and we take up the 5 precepts, then we can call ourselves an upasaka or upasika. So if you only take refuge in the Triple Gem and you don't take on the 5 precepts, then you can't regard yourself, strictly speaking, you can't regard yourself as an upasaka or upasika. Now, although the 5 precepts are the basic morals for householders, the underlying meaning of the 5 precepts cut across all level of precept practices, and even the Bodhisattva precepts are no exception. So the only difference is that with the Bodhisattva precepts, we implement the meaning behind the 5 precepts in a more pure and thorough way. So the 5 precepts can be said to originate from the golden rule of stepping into another's position. Now, we'll go through each precept one by one. So the first is no killing. And this is the precept of abstaining from killing sentient beings. Ideally, killing sentient beings, but in your position, it doesn't mean you immediately have to be vegetarian. Okay, so from a more narrow explanation, it specifically means no killing of human beings. So to uphold the 5 precepts as a householder, it means no killing of human beings. But if you want to uphold it in a more pure and thorough way, then you extend that to sentient beings. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Okay. So this act of no killing also includes whether or not you carry it out yourself, or you hire a hitman, or you get someone else to do it, or you somehow use ways of persuasion to implant the idea of killing so-and-so or such and such into someone else's mind, and then eventually they end up doing the dirty work for you. So this is all in a broader sense of upholding the precept of no killing. Now, in terms of the degree of fault that you would incur, this depends on various conditions. Now, you should think of the fault from breaking the precept as having a spectrum from severe to light. And it's similar to, criminal law. You've got manslaughter and murder in the 1st degree as well. So when we discussed about acts of generosity, we mentioned that the merit gain depends on the intention, the field of merit, and the object that is given. So in a similar way, when we're upholding the precepts and you break the precept, the degree of fault also has various factors. So there's intention, there's the victim, and the result. So the table provides you with a very simple summary. Basically, once the victim's life is forcefully ended, then this completes the act of killing. To clarify this is, say, for example, for some reason, a person decides, I don't like so-and-so, so they make up a plan to kill so-and-so. Until the victim's life comes to an end, then this act of killing isn't considered complete because they're not dead, so to speak. So when it comes to the degree of fault, whether or not the victim actually dies as a result of your action, or whether they only incur harm, and then it depends on the level of harm or injury. That will affect the degree of fault that one incurs. But in terms of the victim, as I mentioned, if the victim is a human being, then the degree of fault is much more severe. If the victim is a non-human being, then it's relatively lighter. And then, of course, with intention, if it was a conscious decision to take that person's life or that being's life, then, of course, the degree of fault is more severe. If it was unintentional, say, heaven forbids, you cause a car accident, which then, leads to someone losing their life. That was unintentional, but the harm has been done. So there's still a degree of fault. But of course, without the conscious decision, the fault is lighter. So, and in terms of, causing harm, you need to also think about it in terms of, in this particular precept of no killing, if you were to uphold it in a more pure and thorough way, it also means to avoid harming sentient beings. So even though the very concise and blunt is precept 1, no killing, because, sometimes you speak to little kids and they said, oh, okay, so I can't kill, but I can kick him, or I can smack her. To uphold this precept in a more thorough, pure, and robust way, it also includes no harming physically with weapons or whatnot. Okay. Now, precept 2 is no stealing. And this precept means to not take anything without permission. So if one takes something without the owner's permission, this constitutes a breach of the precept of no stealing. Now, the item can belong to a country like public assets. It could be private property. It could be property of Buddhism, the Triple Gem. So for example, anything belonging to the monastery is the property of the Triple Gem. So taking something without asking would be considered stealing. So if in doubt, go and ask Faye first. Okay. Now, in the Buddha Dharma, any form of stealing carries a fault, and you can't use any reason. So you can't say it's because I'm so hungry, I'm so poor, or I'm very sick, I need the money for medicine, or desperation, and so forth. There's no reason to justify stealing. And if we think about it, the first precept was to protect the physical being of other people and the people around us. The second precept is to protect their economic life. Because if you're stealing someone's possession, you're imposing on their economic situation. So, and that then affects their life and livelihood and lifestyle and so forth. So you can think of it, in the holistic way of our existence. We have our physical health, but we also rely on our economic situation. So stealing will then indirectly cause harm as well. Yes.
Yeah, but if there are situations where good people would feel compelled to steal food to feed their family, is that a lesser karma, or is it? I mean, it's clear that it's wrong, and you're breaking the precept.
Yep.
But if it's a need, you need that food to survive. What would the conditions be there? Are you still creating karma for you?
Yes, yes. Well, you can split it in two. So if you think of Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and providing for the poor, you can split that in two. His act of stealing from the rich creates bad karma. Okay. His act of trying to help the poor creates relatively good karma. And the reason why I say that is because the gift that he is giving, he has attained by unlawful means. Yeah. So his act of generosity is not entirely pure. Yeah.
He still have married because he steal the food, feed other people.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So his act of generosity does have some merit, but it would have been better if he had tried to, earn that money himself in legal ways. But what I'm trying to stress here is there really shouldn't be a reason to steal. And your example of because they need to feed the family and so forth, one should again employ wisdom and use other ways and other means in order to feed their family. It's sometimes if you end up with tunnel vision and you think that's my only way, then that is the only option you will see. You won't see anything else. But if you tell yourself that is a no-go zone, then you can start to explore other options. So it's a bit, it's the way you train your mind to think of what you should and shouldn't do. Then you can start to look at better options. Yes?
Well, then there's the opposite side. When, say in an invasion, somebody steals the property of the country. Yeah, like when a country in colonialism, they took like museum things or things.
That goes towards collective karma.
Collective karma.
That goes into that moves into the realm of collective karma because with your example of colonialism, when the British and the Portuguese and back in the colonial days when they went exploring and conquering new lands, it was effectively approved of by the people. So that's the country's collective karma for which there's a different type of, karma's complex, which we covered a couple of years ago.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, like in the case of India, that they sort of changed everything.
Okay, so the third precept is the precept of no sexual misconduct. And this precept means to abstain from any sexual misconduct whatsoever. So when a man and a woman are married, their marriage is recognized by the law or by customs and so forth. So everything is done, properly. Then when both parties engage in the activities between husband and wives, this is considered normal. So this is allowable. But in contrast, when in the Buddhist context, sexual misconduct refers to situations when you're not in a recognized lawful marriage. So the activities in this sense is quite important because I know that with modern times, as I've spoken with some friends and neighbors, they say, it's got nothing to do with my parents. I like my girlfriend or I love my boyfriend and we're happy together, full stop. Why do we need that extra piece of paper, basically, is their response. But my response would be, well, why not? What's the harm with getting that extra piece of paper if you really do love each other that much? And it's a way to protect both parties, So some people are a bit more free. So you might talk to another Buddhist monk or nun who's a bit more Gen Z. And they might think that as long as, the couple are committed for life and they regard themselves as a married couple, then whether or not they have that piece of paper, it doesn't matter. So, but generally in the Buddhist context, it needs to be a recognized union, a lawful recognized union. And then any sexual activity outside of that marriage situation with other partners and so forth is considered sexual misconduct. And the main reason here is to protect one's family. And this is another aspect of one's life. So you have one's personal life with precept 1, you have one's economic life with precept 2, and 3, you have their family group, which also is an important aspect of one's life as well. So no engaging in sexual misconduct is to help people, maintain a happy family life. Now, for Buddhist practitioners, if you take up the 8 precepts, this 3rd precept becomes no sexual activity. So it means even if you're married, during the time when you've committed to the 8 precepts, it's best to sleep in separate rooms from your partner for the time of the 8 precepts that you've committed to. So precept number 4 is no deceptive speech, or sometimes you'll see it simply as no lying. And this precept is referring to abstaining from using false language. Often this precept, as I mentioned, is simply translated as no lying. But for a serious practitioner, we should know that the meaning can be very broad. So this relates to our speech and how we use our speech to interact with others. So false language is where you communicate something that is not true or only partly true for the sake of your own benefit or the benefit of your family and so forth, but it will cause harm to others. Now, examples can include saying that you know something when you don't, or vice versa, or saying that you have a certain thing when you don't, or vice versa, or even just saying that something is true when it's not true. So this, such actions, false language, basically causes confusion to people who believe what you say. And if you do that intentionally, you use deceptive speech intentionally to gain benefit for yourself or for someone else and so forth, and you bring harm to others, this constitutes a severe fault in terms of how we use our speech. So other situations may be lighter, and it would be the case of a white lie. The fault is less, but there's still some fault there. So ideally, again, back to the way we think is try and set a no-go zone according to the precept, and then try and find solutions that will work out even better. So these first 4 precepts are called fundamental or primary precepts, and they're such because these actions in themselves carry a fault. Whether or not you're Buddhist, if you walk out into the street and you ask someone, is killing bad? Is stealing bad? Is sexual misconduct bad? Is lying and deceiving bad? They'll definitely say yes. So this is like a universal moral standard. That's why they're sometimes referred to as fundamental or primary precepts. So whether or not you've made the vow to uphold the precepts or not, if you commit such actions, you will leave behind karmic faults. When you decide to take up the precepts and you break them, apart from the karmic fault of this fundamentally bad action, you also then incur a karmic fault of breaking the precepts. Do you understand? So I've taken the precepts. If I break the precept, I have, to make it easier, I have 2 levels of fault. One is the actual action itself, and the other is because I've taken the precept. I've made the commitment not to do this, but I have done it. Conversely, if someone else, someone that I've just pulled off the street, agnostic, no religion at all, they commit the same action that I have done, they only incur the fault of having done a bad deed. Do you understand? So then some people would think, well, then why am I going to take the precept in the first place? You have the reverse benefit of, if you decide to uphold the precepts, you have the merit from not committing these bad deeds, and you have the added merit of upholding the precepts. Okay? So the 5th precept, no alcohol. Now this precept is to abstain from consuming alcohol. And the meaning of alcohol here, given our modern days, should include any intoxicating substances that can cause one to lose control of their mind. Such intoxicating substances are not to be taken or consumed, although some people say that a little red wine is good for the heart. But according to the Buddha Dharma, such substances are considered as having no benefit at all. So first, consuming alcohol or any intoxicating substance causes one to become confused and then eventually lose control of themselves. So once you're drunk, not only does your ability to judge things become impaired, the result is you end up making a lot of mistakes that you more often than not will regret afterwards when you sober up. So in the Vinaya, there are records and stories of the Buddha's disciples who uphold the precepts very strictly, but because of, an accident, and he drank alcohol by accident, he got drunk and eventually he broke all 4 of the fundamental precepts. So that's why it's said that consuming alcohol destroys all virtues. So the first 4 are fundamental precepts. This 5th precept is like if you think of it as a guardian precept, a protective precept to avoid breaking the first 4. Do you understand? Okay, so if we think about a lot of the times when we do go to work, because some people I've been talking to, they'll say, oh, but work requires me to attend drinks and parties and it's not feasible for me to uphold this precept. I would then challenge them and say, well, are you standing your ground, in a sense? So with my own experience, when I completed university and got my first job, and it was with a government department. At the very first drinks party, I made it known to everyone that I'm Buddhist, I can't drink alcohol. So even though they found it odd, but they respected that. And from then on, everyone knew that I just don't touch alcohol. So it's not that hard. I don't think it's that hard to express, this type of activity. But some people do think that, oh, I'm going to look bad in front of the boss if I don't drink and they offer me a drink. But use skillful ways to let them know that you don't touch alcohol, but you can still do a good job. So there are ways to cater to this precept in the workforce. It's a matter of how willing you are to work at it. And that goes back to determination to uphold the precepts and tolerance as well. Okay, so we've gone over time just a little, and this actually brings us close to the end of the 5 precept. So we've got another class this evening as well. Okay, so we'll bring an end to this class.